What was one of the first things that Adam and Eve did after they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden? They raised Cain. All right. That's a dad joke if I've ever heard one, right? They raised Cain. That's what they did. We're continuing through Genesis this morning, Genesis chapter 4. And last week we looked at the fall of man in Genesis 3. And sin entered into the world when Eve fell to the temptation of the serpent, and her husband who was there with her, Adam, fell into that same temptation. They grabbed the fruit, they ate it, and what happened? Sin entered into the world, and it didn't take long for it to devolve into deadly sin. This morning we see the story of the first murder. It's in Genesis 4, and we'll be going through the whole chapter. Let's read this passage together. It says, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord said to him, Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord, and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehuhal, and Mehuhal fathered Methusahel, and Methusahel fathered Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other Zillah. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jabal, and he was the father of all those who played the lyre and pipe. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments, bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time the people began to call upon the name of the Lord. I want you to see first the sacrifices. Adam and Eve have Cain. He's the first person born on the earth. Adam and Eve weren't born. They were created, and they were created already as adults. But they had a child, and the first person born on earth was Cain. And he was a blessing to them. And they named him as such, with Eve saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And then she has Abel. Now both did something respectable. Abel kept sheep and Cain grew crops. Both of those are respectable things to do. You could call agriculture, I guess, the first occupation. First occupation was a farmer. There are difficulties in livestock and there's difficulties in growing crops. Livestock always needs to be fed, don't they? You can't just say, well, I'm going to take 2 weeks off. I think the cows will be all right while I'm gone. It just doesn't work that way. If you're going to take some time off and you got cows, you got to have somebody to watch them. If you've got sheep, you got to have somebody to watch them. The livestock always need fed. They always need constant tending to. And crops have other difficulties like being dependent on the weather. Is it going to rain enough? Is it going to rain too much? I could figure there was probably a lot of tobacco farmers deciding it was time to get the tobacco out of the field, maybe even if it was a little early, because of all the rain that we might have this week from the tropical storm. Thinking about what it could do and the wind could do to the crop. And so you never know. You're dependent on the weather. You have to worry about bugs and weeds and disease and the rest. So it's 2 difficult jobs. But that's what they did. It's what they did. Abel being a livestock man, Cain being someone who grew crops, and they were giving their offerings to the Lord. Cain brings fruits and vegetables. And Abel brings the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. And it says that God approved of Abel's offering, but not Cain's. Why is that? Is it that God thought less of what it was that Cain was doing as far as growing fruits and vegetables? Or that he thought greater of what Abel was doing by being a livestock farmer? That's not it at all. I think the implication here is not that Cain brought the best that he had to the Lord, but that he brought something haphazard and less than the best. Yet Abel, on the other hand, brought what we know is the best. The most prized, the firstborn of his flock, and the fat portion. You ever tried to eat a really lean steak? Yeah. It's like shoe leather. It takes forever to cut through it, and then when you eat it, you're like, man, that is tough. But now, have you ever had a ribeye that's been marbled and is almost half fat as you go through it? Y'all getting hungry yet? Thinking about a ribeye? You ever eat a ribeye that's got marbling in it where the fat's marbled in? Even if you cut the fat off, the meat around the fat, what is it? It's good and tender meat. You don't even sometimes need a knife. You can just pull it right off with your fork and you can eat it. That's what I'm talking about right there. Quality, tender meat. What was it that he brought to God? He brought the firstborn and the fat portions. He brought the best of what he had to God. And Cain looks at it and says, God's happy with that. God's not happy with mine. And what does he do? He gets angry. Who should Cain have been angry at? Should have been angry at himself. Exactly. But who does he get mad at? He gets mad at God, and then he gets mad at Abel. He lets that green monster of jealousy rise up in him, and God gives him a warning. God gives him a warning. He says, why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. He says to him, why, Cain, are you angry? What did you expect? What did you expect? If you do well, you get accepted. Bring me some of the good vegetables, the good fruit, the best of what you have. Bring that to me and you will be accepted. But if you do not, and you just want to get angry about it, sin is crouching at the door. And you better beat back that temptation. You see how sin's like a little monster, isn't it? A little monster with a big bite. It's crouching at his door. Ready to pounce on him. Ready to bring him down. Ready to make him do something that he shouldn't do. And what does God say? He says, its desire is contrary to you, but you have to rule over it. You have to say, I'm not going to fall into that sin. We need to give God the best. He's worth more than our leftovers, isn't He? Too often, that's what we want to give Him. Imagine how you would feel if somebody gave you a gift and they were like, I wanted you to have this. This is really special to me. And they weren't joking around. They were being serious. This is really special to me. This is really good to me. And you open it up and there was a rotten apple inside the box. How would you feel? Would you think that person loved you very much? If that's what they thought you were worthy of as a gift was a rotten apple? Now, I don't know how bad Cain's offering was, but I know it was at least something that the Lord said, no, that doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me. That's what we do. Too often we give God our rotten apples. We're like, I got 8 apples. Here's 7 good ones. I'll go ahead and keep them. Here's this other one. It looks kind of weird. I'll go ahead and give that one to God. We give Him what's left over, whatever we don't want. I'm not talking about money, although that does matter. Often we'll just give Him whatever we've got left over. I'm also talking about time, about our energy, about our effort, about our desire, our affection. Imagine how our church would be if we would devote as much to God as we do to other things. We would devote as much to God as we do to other things in our lives. How much better we would be. We're all like Cain sometimes. We don't give God the best, and sin crouches at our doors. We have to kick that sin off the porch and give God the best. To be willing to give Him the best. What happens? We see the slaying in verse 8. Cain and Abel are out in the field talking, and Cain rises up and he kills Abel. Murder has entered the earth. Murder isn't a problem of the implement, is it? It's a problem of the heart. What do I mean by that? Too often in the world we think, well, if we get rid of the implements that people use to kill people, then we can get rid of people killing people. Right? We think we could get rid of it, and we don't realize what really the problem is. Right? What do we want to have? We want to have gun control, right? And we have gun control because if we have gun control, then less people will die. And then in countries where they have heavy gun control, what are they talking about now? They're talking about having knife control, right? Maybe not everybody should be able to have a knife, because what did people start doing? When they didn't have guns to shoot people with, they started stabbing them. And then you go on, if you got rid of knives, you know what you're going to have next? You're going to need some common sense rock control. Because we're going to go all the way back to Cain and Abel, because I figure that Cain rose up with a rock and hit Abel in the head. We didn't blame the rock. God didn't blame the rock. He blamed him. What about people that drive cars into groups of people? You're going to say, well, he's just not going to do it. Here's the thing. You can't take away enough stuff where people won't kill other people. Unless we're going to cut off everybody's hands and feet. Right? Because you can kill people with your hands. It happens every day in the United States of America that someone gets killed with somebody else's hands. The problem isn't the implement. You know what the problem is? The problem is man's heart. That's our problem. When man kills, it's man's fault, because we get angry and we let our anger build up so much. We let the evil build up so much that we would even take the life of another human being. Cain killed because he had that sin crouching at his door. And rather than kicking him off the porch, he opened it up and let him in. Said, what are we going to do about it? And he kills his brother. Look at the sentence in verses 19 through 16. The Lord asked Cain, where's Abel? I think God was giving him a chance to confess and repent. I think He was giving him a chance. That's just my interpretation. Because God knew where he was. God knew what had happened. But he asked him just to give him a chance. And what does he answer back? How am I supposed to know? Am I my brother's keeper? Now, when I was growing up, I used to say that all the time. It'd make my mom, she's like, have you seen Tyler? I said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? She's like, you better stop saying that. That's what the first murderer said. That's what I always said. Am I my brother's keeper? Every time she'd ask where my brother was. That's what he says. Am I my brother's keeper? Rather than taking God's opportunity to confess and repent and maybe have less of a judgment on him, no. He just, am I my brother's keeper? How am I supposed to know where he's at? And God says, what have you done? What have you done? We see a curse and a blessing in verses 10 through about verse 16. He says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground. So he gives him that curse there. The ground is cursed. And he says, just like it opened up to receive your brother's blood, it's going to open up and it's going to take your work. What you try to do in the ground, it's not going to yield to you its strength. Where maybe most people would get a whole lot more crop, you're not going to get as much crop as everybody else. And he says, you'll be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. He was cursed to be a bad farmer. He is cursed to have a brown thumb. That's what we always say. Some people got a brown thumb and some people got a green thumb. You ever heard anybody have a green thumb? It just doesn't matter what they touch. It grows beautifully and perfect. And then there's other people, they have a brown thumb. They can kill a plastic plant. It's the way some people have it. That brown thumb. He was cursed to have the brown thumb after that. He was cursed to be a fugitive and a wanderer. Think about that. No place to call home. To be a wanderer. Home's a sweet place, isn't it? When you've been gone for a while, it feels good to come home. It feels good to go home. Cain never got to feel that again. He went to an area. He went into Nod, east of Eden. He never really settled down. He settled in the land, but he wandered around in that land. So he was cursed, but he also got a blessing too. Once God said what was going to happen to him, he said, my punishment is greater than I can bear. You've driven me away from the ground. From your face I shall be hidden. Whoever finds me is going to kill me. And God says, no. No. If anybody kills you, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on him so that anybody that found him wouldn't attack him. And that's when he goes away to Nod. See, God still shows mercy. Cain says, I'll be killed, and I'll be killed by my own family. How do I know it'd be his own family? Because that's who was on the earth right then. He said, I'll be killed even by my own family. And the Lord offers him protection. The protection of a sevenfold vengeance. And he puts the mark on him. Who knows what the mark is? I know a lot of people have come up with ideas over time about what the mark is. But I think the one thing we know about the mark is it was clear that that mark on him let everybody know that came up to him, do not kill him. Right? It was a mark. It was a mark. It could have been almost like a force field. Do not touch him, because if you do, you will have 7 times vengeance against you. After he takes his mark, he goes on, settles in Nod, settles to wander. God shows mercy even in his discipline. God has shown mercy to you. He's given you time to repent and believe. But mercy ends. Mercy ends at the death of an unbeliever. So make sure you're a believer, so that you can experience his mercy eternally. The story doesn't end there. We're going to look at the sons and daughters in verses 17 through 26, finish out the chapter. It says, Cain knew his wife. As the kids would say these days, hold up! What do you mean Cain knew his wife? There was Adam and Eve, and there was Cain and Abel. How in the world do you have a wife? Y'all remember Jeff Foxworthy? You might be a redneck if you go to a family reunion looking for a date. Right? Who was Cain's wife? It was either his sister or his niece. Okay? That's who it had to be. A lot of people say, well, the scripture may be wrong. It says that Cain had a wife. Who else was it going to be? His sister or his niece. The gene pool wasn't messed up yet, all right? So it wasn't like now if you married your sister, you could have all kinds of trouble. The gene pool wasn't that messed up yet. Eventually, by the time of Moses, they prohibited marrying close family members like that. And you have to remember that the way the genealogies are done in Genesis, they are not exhaustive. Remember what we have Seth mentioned here at the end, but then after that in Genesis 5:4 and 5, it says that the days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years. He had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So that means he was 130 years old when he had Seth. So they were still having babies. So they were populating the earth, so there were a lot of kids there. Probably lots of them. And so, how does it make sense? Adam had many sons and daughters. And these genealogies are not exhaustive. Seth is mentioned because Seth gets us to Noah, who gets us to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Judah, to David, and to Jesus. Now, I'm not going to go through all of Cain's lineage here, mostly because I can't read those names again. But we'll talk about a couple of them. The first is Enoch. Enoch, the one that we have here, is different from the one we're going to read in Genesis 5. And I just thought I'd point that out because we're going to talk a little bit about Enoch next week. And when we talk about him, I don't want you to get confused and think that it was Cain's. Enoch is one of Seth's lineage, not one of Cain's. That when we talk about Enoch in the Bible, usually that is who we're talking about. He had people in his family that were farmers and musicians and weapon makers. And yes, they had murderers in their family. Lamech killed a man for wounding him, a young man for striking him. And he claimed not a sevenfold vengeance, but a 77-fold vengeance. Now, when God said that if Cain were killed, that he would have a sevenfold vengeance, who was going to take that vengeance? God was going to take that vengeance. Who was Lamech using to take vengeance? It was himself, right? He didn't meet force with force. He said, there was a man that wounded me, so I killed him. There was a man that struck me, so I killed him. He was taking it all on himself, all the vengeance on himself. Too often, we forget that vengeance is the Lord's. Too often, we're like the old saying goes, I don't get mad, I get even. You ever heard people say that before? I don't get mad, I get even. And that's what we think we're going to do. When we're wronged, we need to let go and let God work in His way. Finally, at the end of this chapter, we see a ray of hope. A ray of hope at the end of a sad chapter. We see the birth of Seth and worship. It says at that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. And thousands of years later, we're still calling upon the name of the Lord. You need to give God your best. Don't be like Cain, give God the leftovers. Be like Abel, give God the best of what you have. Take responsibility for your own sin. Remember the mercy of God. Make it eternal by putting your trust in Him. And call upon the name of the Lord. Because He's the only one who could save you and bless you beyond anything you ever imagined. Let's bow our heads together.